Have you ever had that moment when a completely normal situation suddenly turns into something completely unexpected? Like, you're just doing your job, following your routine, and suddenly everything changes? Well, that happened to an Uber driver in Chicago on a Friday night, and boy, this story will keep you thinking for days. Before I continue, if you enjoy true stories that feel like movie scripts, give me a like and subscribe to the channel because I guarantee you won't want to miss the end of this one. It was a typical October night, cold in that Chicago-like way, and Jake was doing his usual routine, taking rides around the city. He'd been an Uber driver for about 3 years and had seen it all. Drunk passengers, couples fighting in the back seat, people crying on the phone, the kind of things that come with the job. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or at least that's what he thought until that night. The ride showed up on his app around 10:30. The destination was in a residential neighborhood about 20 minutes away. No big deal. When he arrived at the starting point, he saw a woman outside a somewhat upscale Italian restaurant. She was alone, checking her phone, and when she saw his car, she waved and got in the back seat. Jake gave that automatic good night, confirmed the destination, and voila, another ride began. For the first few minutes, everything was standard. She mentioned the cold, he agreed. They talked about the traffic, but there was something different about her, you know? Her voice was calm, almost musical, and she seemed genuinely interested in his answers. When he mentioned he'd been driving for Uber for 3 years, she asked if he liked it, if he had any interesting stories, and boy, did she really want to know. Jake started recounting some of the funniest situations he'd experienced at work, and she laughed in that way that makes you want to tell more stories just to hear that sound again. He glanced in the rearview mirror every now and then and saw that she was smiling, leaning back in the seat, completely relaxed. There was a strange energy in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was kind of magnetic. The conversation flowed so naturally that Jake didn't even notice when they passed her neighborhood. It wasn't until the GPS announced you'd reached your destination that he realized he had arrived and parked in front of a red brick house. He waited for her to grab her things and get out, already mentally preparing to accept the next ride, but she didn't move. She sat there in the back seat, silent for a few seconds. "So," she finally said, but made no move to open the door. "Do you have any more rides scheduled right now?" The question caught him off guard. Jake looked at the app, then at the rearview mirror, and said no. She nodded slowly and then blurted out something that completely changed the mood. "Do you mind if we talk some more?" "Right here, in the car." Man, Jake was speechless for a moment. It wasn't a normal request, definitely, but it didn't seem threatening either. She just wanted to talk. He kind of laughed nervously and said, "Okay," and she smiled that way that lit up the car. And look, if you're enjoying this story, comment below, what was the strangest interaction you've ever had with a stranger? What began as a casual conversation grew deeper and deeper. She said she'd just left a work dinner where she felt completely out of place, that sometimes her life felt like a sequence of meaningless obligations. Jake related, talking about how he'd quit a corporate job because he felt like a cog in the machine, and that driving for Uber had given him a freedom he didn't know he needed. They talked about old dreams, about places they wanted to visit, about that strange feeling of being an adult but still feeling lost. And man, it wasn't just idle chatter. It was the kind of conversation you have once in a lifetime with someone when all your defenses fall and you're simply honest, vulnerable, real. Time passed. 15 minutes turned into 30, 30 into 45. Jake turned off the Uber app at some point. The street was empty, silent, and inside the car, it was as if the two of them existed in a universe all their own. At some point, she tilted her head and asked if he believed in instant connections, if he thought it was possible to truly know someone in such a short amount of time. Jake's heart raced. He said he didn't know, but that night was unlike any other. She nodded silently, and their glance in the rearview mirror lasted a few seconds longer than it should have. "I should get in," she said finally, but didn't move. "I know I should." Jake didn't answer because he didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted her to stay. Another part knew this was too surreal. She sighed, grabbed her bag, and finally opened the door. Cold air rushed into the car like a jolt of reality. But before she completely left, she turned and said, "Thank you, really. I needed this today." Jake just waved. She closed the door and started walking. But halfway there, she stopped and looked back. She stood there on the sidewalk, staring at his car as if deciding something. And guys, this is where the story gets really interesting. So don't leave the video now. Jake had his hand on his key, ready to leave, but something made him wait. She took 2 steps back, then stopped again. He saw her biting her lip, clearly debating something. That's when she walked back to his window. Jake rolled down the window, and she leaned against the door, resting her arms on it. "Look," she began, and he could tell she was nervous. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but do you want to come in for coffee? I just don't want this conversation to end yet." Jake's heart raced. He knew he had 1,000 reasons to say no. Safety rules, protocol, basic common sense. But he also knew this connection wasn't something he had every day. He looked into her eyes and saw only sincerity. And maybe fear that he'd say no. "Me," he began, and saw her expression change. But then he turned off the engine and said, "Okay, coffee sounds good." The smile she gave was pure, genuine, relieved. They walked together to the front door. She opened the door, turned on the lights, and he entered a cozy living room lined with bookshelves and plants. While she went to make coffee, Jake stood there in disbelief. He'd woken up thinking it would be just another normal day, and now he was at a stranger's house at 11:30 at night. She returned with 2 steaming mugs and sat on the couch, patting the space next to her. And they continued talking, now without the confines of the car, without the engine running, without any excuses to leave. The conversation flowed even more easily, as if they were old friends. They laughed, fell into a comfortable silence, and at other moments the intensity returned with a vengeance. But here's where I need to tell you something important. Jake told me this story a few months ago at a bar, and when he got to this part, he stopped talking and stared into his glass with a half-melancholy, half-happy smile. I asked him what happened, if it turned into a romance, if it was just that one night. And you know what he said? That some stories don't need a definite ending to be perfect. That night changed something in him, in the way he viewed human connections. He stayed there until almost 3 a.m. The conversation never lost intensity, they exchanged numbers, and, well, he smiled and said, "I didn't need to know all the details." What I do know is that 3 months later, Jake stopped driving Uber. Not because something bad happened, but because that night showed that sometimes you need to be open to the unexpected, and he decided to take the risks he'd been putting off. And that's what fascinates me about this story. We spend our lives thinking we know all the possibilities. And then, life throws us an unexpected curveball. A passenger who doesn't want to get out of the car, a conversation that turns into a confession, a coffee that turns into something more. So I leave you with this. What if the next person you exchange words with is someone who will change your life? What if that casual conversation is the beginning of something extraordinary? Are you open to that? Comment below with your opinion, whether you think Jake did the right thing, or whether you would have done the same. And if you enjoyed this story and want more content like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Life's too short to not accept that coffee when someone special invites you. See you in the next video.